Most people think ramen is just Japanese noodle soup. A bowl with noodles, broth, maybe pork, egg, and scallions. But that definition misses the one thing that actually makes ramen feel like ramen. Because if you remove one mostly invisible layer from the bowl, it can still look right and still fail to taste right. And that hidden layer is exactly why two bowls that look almost identical can taste like completely different worlds. So what is ramen, actually? At its core, ramen is not just a soup with noodles. It is a structured dish built from multiple layers that have to work together. Real ramen is usually built from four main parts: the noodles, the broth, the tare, and the aroma oil. Then come the toppings, and this is the first thing most people get wrong. Most people think the broth is the whole story, but broth is only one layer. Sometimes not even the most important one, because ramen is less like one recipe and more like a system. And once you understand that system, ramen starts making a lot more sense. First, the noodles. Ramen noodles are usually made from wheat flour, water, salt, and one crucial ingredient: Kansui. Kansui is an alkaline mineral solution, and this one ingredient changes almost everything. It gives ramen noodles their springy bite, their slight yellow color, and that very specific, firm, snappy texture you do not get from udon or most other wheat noodles. Without Kansui, the noodle may still be good, but it will not feel like ramen in the same way. This is why ramen noodles can be thin and straight, thick and wavy, soft, firm, low hydration, high hydration, and still stay within the ramen world, because they all belong to the same logic. Now let's talk about where ramen comes from. This part matters because ramen is often simplified into something it is not. Ramen is a Japanese dish, but it has Chinese roots. The exact historical path is still debated. What most historians agree on is that wheat noodles, influenced by Chinese cooking, entered Japan through trade, migration, and port city food culture, especially in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Early versions were often called shina soba or chuka soba, which basically meant Chinese-style noodles. But here is the important point. Modern ramen is not just borrowed Chinese noodles. It became a distinctly Japanese dish through adaptation, regional reinvention, and decades of culinary development. And after World War II, ramen expanded dramatically. Wheat became more widely available, street stalls grew in popularity, local styles spread. And ramen slowly transformed from an imported influence into one of Japan's most recognizable and diverse everyday foods. Now, here is where ramen becomes really interesting, because ramen is not defined by noodles alone, and it is not defined by broth alone either. The broth matters, of course, a lot. It can be made from pork bones, chicken, seafood, vegetables, or combinations of all of them. It can be clear and delicate, or thick and cloudy. Tonkotsu, for example, is made by boiling pork bones for a long time until the broth turns rich, opaque, and deeply savory. Shoyu ramen often uses a clearer broth seasoned with soy-based tare. Shio ramen tends to feel lighter and salt-driven. Miso ramen adds body, sweetness, and fermented depth. But now we get to the part many casual ramen fans have never heard about: tare. Tare is the concentrated seasoning base added to the bowl before the broth goes in. And in many ways, tare is one of the hidden engines of ramen. It is usually made from soy sauce, salt, miso, or other concentrated seasonings, sometimes layered with dried fish, kombu, mushrooms, aromatics, or fermented elements. And this is the secret. Two ramen shops can use very similar broths and still produce bowls that taste completely different because their tare is different. That is why ramen is not just broth plus noodles. It is broth plus tare plus noodle plus aroma oil, all in balance. And then there is the aroma oil. This is another layer people often notice without realizing what they are noticing. Chicken fat, garlic oil, scallion oil, sesame oil, chili oil. These oils sit on the surface and hit your nose before the broth even reaches your tongue. So the first impression of ramen is not only taste, it is smell, it is heat, it is fat carrying aroma, and that changes everything. This is also why ramen can feel so intense, so comforting, and so complete, even before you think about the toppings. Which brings us to another common misunderstanding. Toppings are important, but they are not the core identity of ramen. Egg, chashu, bamboo shoots, nori, corn, butter, scallions, bean sprouts, these help shape the bowl. They add contrast, texture, richness, freshness, and personality. But they are not what make ramen ramen. You could remove the egg and still have ramen. You could swap pork for chicken and still have ramen. You could simplify the toppings dramatically and still have ramen. But if the noodle, broth, tare, and aromatic balance are wrong, the bowl falls apart. That is the difference. Now, let's look at why ramen varies so much from region to region. Because ramen is not one fixed dish. It is a whole family of local styles. Sapporo ramen from Hokkaido is famous for miso-based broth, richer body, and often curly noodles that hold up well in cold weather. Hakata ramen from Fukuoka is known for tonkotsu broth and very thin noodles, often served firm. Kitakata ramen is loved for flatter, curly noodles and a lighter soy-based broth. Tokyo-style ramen often leans on soy seasoning, chicken, and seafood notes. Different climate, different history, different local ingredients, different preferences, and the bowl changes with them. That is why asking, what is authentic ramen, can be more complicated than people think. There is no single bowl that represents all ramen. There is a tradition, a structure, and many regional expressions inside it. And this is where ramen becomes especially interesting next to udon. Because udon usually puts the noodle itself at the center. Its texture is the star. Its broth often supports rather than dominates. Ramen is different. Ramen is layered, engineered, and more aggressively built. The noodle matters, yes, but ramen is designed around interaction. The noodle, the broth, the tare, the oil, the toppings, each one is shaping the others. So the real difference between ramen and udon is not just thickness, it is architecture. Udon often feels simple and calm. Ramen often feels layered and constructed. That is why ramen can be so addictive. Every sip and bite keeps changing depending on what comes together in that moment. And this leads to the deeper truth. Ramen is not simply a Japanese noodle soup. Ramen is a modular flavor system with Chinese roots, Japanese development, regional identity, and an enormous amount of craft hidden inside one bowl. It is a dish where the invisible parts matter just as much as the visible ones, maybe more. So if you only remember one thing from this video, let it be this. Ramen is not defined by toppings, not even by broth alone. Ramen becomes ramen when noodles, broth, tare, and aroma work as one system. And once you see that, every bowl tells a much bigger story. So now I want to ask you, when you eat ramen, what do you notice first? The broth, the noodles, the smell, or the toppings? And if you want to understand why udon feels so different from ramen, watch that video next.